At 32 years old, Ethan Cole made a choice on a deserted road that destroyed his only chance at saving his daughter from poverty. Stopping to help a stranger cost him the interview that would have changed everything. Weeks later, luxury SUVs rolled onto his construction site, and the woman he saved stepped out in a designer suit, revealing herself as one of the richest developers in the country. What happened next proved that one moment of kindness could rewrite an entire life. If you're watching this story unfold, hit that like button right now and drop a comment with your city name so I can see how far this journey reaches across the world. The alarm went off at 4:30 in the morning, the same time it had every day for the past 3 years. Ethan Cole's hand shot out from under the thin blanket and slammed the button before the noise could wake Lily. In the silence that followed, he lay there staring at the water-stained ceiling of their apartment, feeling the weight of another day pressing down on his chest. He couldn't afford to feel it. Not today. Ethan dragged himself out of bed and moved through the cramped bedroom in the dark, careful not to bump into the plastic bins stacked against the wall. Everything they owned that didn't fit in the single closet. The apartment was barely 500 square feet. Lily's room was a corner sectioned off by a hanging sheet he'd rigged up with tension rods. She deserved better. She deserved everything. In the bathroom, he splashed cold water on his face and stared at the mirror. The man looking back at him had dark circles carved under his eyes, and a jaw that hadn't been clean-shaven in days. 32 years old, and he looked 40. 3 years of construction work and sleepless nights had done that. 3 years since the accident that took Rebecca. He pushed the thought away. Not today. Today was different. Today was the second interview. Ethan pulled on the only dress shirt he owned, the blue one Rebecca had bought him for their anniversary 5 years ago. It was too big now. He'd lost weight he couldn't afford to lose. But it was clean and pressed. He'd stayed up past midnight ironing it. The tie took 3 tries to get right. His hands were shaking. In the kitchen, he made instant coffee and forced down 2 pieces of toast he didn't want. The interview was at 9. The engineering firm was downtown, 40 minutes away if traffic was decent. He'd leave at 7 to be safe, which gave him 2 hours to get Lily ready and drop her at his mother's place. He checked his portfolio for the 10th time. Structural drawings, project specs, the bridge design that had won him an award back when he still had a career. Back when he was someone. The pages were crisp and professional, but his hands left smudges on the plastic sleeves. He wiped them on his pants. "Daddy?" Lily's voice came from behind the curtain. Ethan set the portfolio down and crossed to her corner, pulling the fabric aside. She was sitting up in her narrow bed, clutching the stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 2. Her blonde hair stuck up in every direction. "Morning, sweetheart." He sat on the edge of the bed and smoothed her hair down. "You're up early." "I heard the beep thing." She rubbed her eyes. "Are you going somewhere?" "Just for a little while. Grandma's going to watch you today." "Is it the job thing?" Ethan's throat tightened. She was 6 years old and she already understood what the job thing meant. She'd heard him on the phone with the bank. She'd seen the eviction notice he thought he'd hidden well enough. "Yeah, baby, the job thing." Lily reached out and straightened his tie with her small fingers. "You look fancy." "You think so? Mommy would say you look fancy." The words hit him in the chest. He pulled Lily into a hug and held on, maybe a second too long. "Your mommy would say I need a haircut." Lily giggled against his shoulder. "You do need a haircut." "All right, critic, let's get you dressed." The next hour passed in the mechanical rhythm of routine, cereal and milk, clothes that were getting too small, brushing teeth and finding shoes. Ethan moved through it on autopilot, his mind already downtown, already in that conference room. This was his second chance. He'd bombed the first interview 3 months ago. Showed up unprepared, gave terrible answers, couldn't focus. He'd been working a double shift the night before and hadn't slept. When they'd called him back for a second interview last week, he'd almost dropped the phone. People didn't get second chances. Not in his world. But here it was. By 6:30 they were in his truck, a 15-year-old Ford with a rusted bumper and a passenger door that stuck. Lily sat in her booster seat humming a song from school, while Ethan navigated the empty morning streets toward his mother's house across town. Carol Cole lived in a small ranch house that used to feel warm. Now it just felt like a place where Ethan got lectured. He pulled into the driveway and killed the engine. "Remember, Grandma's rules," he said, unbuckling Lily. Inside voice, "No jumping on furniture." "I know, Daddy." His mother opened the door before they reached the porch. She was in her bathrobe, a coffee mug in one hand, her reading glasses pushed up into her gray hair. She looked at Ethan's shirt and tie, and something flickered across her face. Hope, maybe, or just exhaustion. "Morning," Ethan said. "You're early." Carol stepped aside to let them in. "I'm not even dressed yet. I wanted to beat traffic. It's not even 7. Mom." She held up a hand. "Fine. Come here, Lily." Lily ran to her grandmother and wrapped her arms around her waist. Carol kissed the top of her head, then looked at Ethan over the girl's shoulder. "You ready for this?" "I'm ready." "You look nervous." "I'm not nervous." Liar. She set her mug down and crossed her arms. "Ethan, this is important. Do you understand how important this is?" "I know, Mom. Because you don't get a third chance. Not with a firm like this. If you mess this up, I'm not going to mess it up." "You better not!" Her voice went sharp. "That little girl is depending on you. We're 2 months behind on rent. The school called about her lunch account. I can't keep giving you money I don't have." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I'll get the job. You said that last time. This is different. It better be." Carol's expression softened slightly. "I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm trying to keep you awake. You've been sleepwalking for 3 years. I'm awake. Then prove it. Go downtown and show them the man I raised, not this version of you that's given up." Ethan wanted to argue, but Lily was watching him with those wide blue eyes, Rebecca's eyes, and he couldn't do it. He knelt down and pulled her into one more hug. "Be good for Grandma. I will. I love you, sweetheart." "Love you, Daddy. Good luck with the job thing." He kissed her forehead and stood, avoiding his mother's gaze as he headed back to the truck. The drive downtown should have taken 40 minutes. Ethan gave himself 2 hours. He drove carefully, 10 miles under the speed limit, hands at 10 and 2 like a student driver. The truck's engine made a rattling sound he couldn't afford to investigate. The radio didn't work. He sat in silence and rehearsed his answers. "Why should we hire you?" "Because I'm one of the best structural engineers you'll ever meet. Because I graduated top of my class. Because I have vision and precision and I don't cut corners." "Why have you been out of the field for 3 years?" "Because my wife died and I fell apart. Because I couldn't pay for childcare and work full time. Because I made choices." He couldn't say that. He'd have to find another way to explain the gap. Something that didn't sound like he was making excuses. The highway stretched ahead of him, 3 lanes of early commuter traffic beginning to thicken. Ethan merged into the center lane and checked the clock on the dashboard. 7:40. He'd be downtown by 8:15, early enough to sit in the parking garage and review his portfolio one more time. Then the road opened up. Traffic thinned as the highway cut through a stretch of undeveloped land between the suburbs and the city. Empty fields on both sides, a few clusters of trees, farmland that hadn't been sold to developers yet. The sky was lightening but still gray, the kind of October morning that promised cold rain by afternoon. Ethan was thinking about the bridge project in his portfolio, mentally walking through the load calculations, when he saw the car. It was pulled onto the shoulder maybe a quarter-mile ahead, hazard lights blinking. A black luxury sedan, expensive looking, completely out of place on this empty stretch of road. And standing next to it, barely visible in the gray morning light, was a woman. Ethan's foot moved toward the brake before his brain caught up. Don't stop. The thought was immediate and clear. He had an interview in an hour. He couldn't afford to be late. Whatever was wrong with that car, it wasn't his problem. But the woman was alone. Completely alone. And as Ethan got closer, he could see she was wearing heels and a business suit, totally unprepared for standing on the side of a highway. Her arms were wrapped around herself against the cold. Keep driving. He pressed harder on the gas. The car swept past her in a rush of wind and engine noise. In the rearview mirror, Ethan saw her turn to watch him go. And something about her posture, the defeat in her shoulders, the way she hugged herself tighter, made his chest ache. He knew that posture. He'd worn it himself for 3 years. Damn it! Ethan hit the brakes and pulled onto the shoulder 50 yards ahead. He sat there for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, fighting with himself. You can't do this. You'll be late. You'll lose everything. But he was already putting the truck in reverse. The woman watched him approach, and Ethan could see the relief flood her face. She stepped away from the car as he pulled up behind her and rolled down his window. You all right? He called out. My car died. Her voice was tight, controlled, but he could hear the stress underneath. It just stopped. I don't know what happened. Ethan glanced at the luxury sedan. You call anyone? Geeky. No signal out here. She held up her phone. I've been standing here 20 minutes and you're the first person who stopped. Because everyone else was smarter than him. Everyone else had places to be. Ethan killed his engine and climbed out. The cold morning air bit through his dress shirt immediately. The woman was younger than he'd thought, maybe 30, with dark hair pulled back in a professional style and a face that belonged in a corporate boardroom. Her suit probably cost more than his truck. I'm Ethan, he said, walking toward her. Let me take a look. I don't know anything about cars. She stepped back to give him room, hugging herself again. I was driving and everything just stopped. Ethan popped the hood and leaned in. It didn't take long to spot the problem. Your serpentine belt's shredded. That's why it died. Can you fix it? Not without a belt and a tow truck. He straightened and looked at her. You got someone you can call once we get you somewhere with signal? Oh, bye. Yes, my assistant. She'll send someone. The woman let out a shaky breath. Thank you for stopping. I was starting to think no one would. Where were you headed? Downtown. I have a meeting at 9. Ethan's stomach dropped. What time is it now? She checked her phone. 7:50. He had an hour and 10 minutes. If he left right now, he could still make it. The woman was watching him with those careful, controlled eyes. I know you're busy. If you could just drop me at the next exit, I can figure it out from there. Next exit was 15 minutes back the way he'd come, then 15 minutes back to here, then the drive downtown, which would put him at the firm at 9:15, maybe 9:30 with parking. Late. Ethan felt the words settle into his bones like ice. But the woman was standing there in heels on a highway shoulder with no phone signal and no way out. And he couldn't just leave her. I'm going downtown anyway, he heard himself say. I'll take you. The relief in her face was immediate. Are you sure? I don't want to... It's fine, come on. They got into his truck, and Ethan tried not to notice how out of place she looked in the passenger seat of his beat-up Ford. She didn't complain about the broken radio or the coffee stain on the dashboard. She just buckled in and wrapped her arms around herself again. I'm Victoria, she said as Ethan pulled back onto the highway. Victoria Hale. Ethan Cole. Thank you, Ethan. Really. I know this is, It's fine, he said again, but his hands were tight on the wheel and his eyes kept flicking to the clock. 7:53, 7:54. They drove in silence for a few minutes. Victoria stared out the window at the flat landscape rolling past, and Ethan tried to calculate drive times in his head. If traffic was light, if he caught the right lights, if the parking garage wasn't full. You said you're going downtown? Victoria's voice broke into his thoughts. Yeah. Where downtown? Madison Tower. The words came out before he could stop them. I have an interview. He felt her look at him, but he kept his eyes on the road. What time? 9. Oh. A pause. I'm so sorry, I'm making you late. You're not making me do anything. I stopped. Still. Ethan didn't respond. The city skyline was starting to appear in the distance, a cluster of tall buildings breaking through the gray morning haze. 8:05. 8:08. Traffic was picking up. What kind of interview? Victoria asked quietly. Engineering firm, structural engineer. Madison Tower. She was quiet for a moment. Pierce Whitman and Associates? Ethan glanced at her. You know them? I know of them. They're very good. She paused. This is your first interview with them? Second. He didn't elaborate, and Victoria didn't push. They fell back into silence, but Ethan could feel the weight of what he wasn't saying pressing against his ribs. This wasn't just an interview. This was the last chance. The one thing standing between Lily and a childhood spent in poverty, between him and the complete obliteration of everything he'd spent 32 years building. And he was going to be late. They hit downtown traffic at 8:30. What should have been a straight shot to Madison Tower turned into a crawling mess of brake lights and construction detours. Ethan's jaw ached from clenching it. Beside him, Victoria sat in tense silence, checking her phone every few minutes, even though she'd already texted her assistant. Where do you need to be? Ethan asked, his voice rough. Pearson Hotel, the conference center. That was 6 blocks from Madison Tower, in the wrong direction. Ethan made a decision. I'll drop you first. No. Your interview. I'm already late. 6 blocks won't matter. It was a lie, and they both knew it. But Victoria didn't argue. She just nodded and looked out the window. They reached the Pearson Hotel at 8:52. Ethan pulled up to the circular drive where valets in uniform stood waiting, and Victoria unbuckled her seatbelt. She turned to face him, and for the first time he saw past the controlled exterior to something genuine underneath. Thank you, she said. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stopped. You would have figured it out. Maybe. She pulled the business card from her purse and pressed it into his hand. If there's ever anything I can do, anything at all, please call me. Ethan looked at the card. Thick, expensive paper. Victoria Hale, Executive Vice President, Hale Global Developments. A phone number and email address in elegant print. You don't owe me anything, he said. I disagree. Victoria opened the door, then paused. Good luck with your interview, Ethan. I hope you get the job. She climbed out and hurried toward the hotel entrance, heels clicking on the pavement. One of the valets moved to intercept Ethan's truck, but Ethan was already pulling away, back into the mess of downtown traffic. Madison Tower was 7 minutes away. His interview was in 3 minutes. He made it to the parking garage at 9:14. By the time Ethan reached the 23rd floor, walked through the glass doors of Pierce, Whitman, and Associates, and gave his name to the receptionist, it was 9:22. The receptionist's smile was professional and cold. Mr. Cole, you're late. I know. I'm sorry. There was... Mr. Whitman doesn't appreciate lateness. Please have a seat. Us. Ethan sat in one of the leather chairs in the waiting area and tried to control his breathing. His shirt was damp with sweat under his jacket. His portfolio felt heavy in his lap. The office around him was all glass and steel and money, the kind of place he used to belong. 20 minutes later, the receptionist called his name. Mr. Whitman will see you now. Ethan followed her down a hallway lined with architectural photographs and into a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Behind a massive desk sat Richard Whitman, senior partner, 60 years old, in a suit that probably cost more than Ethan's truck. Whitman didn't stand when Ethan entered. He didn't smile. He looked at Ethan with the expression of a man who'd already made up his mind. Mr. Cole, Whitman said. You're late. Yes, sir. I apologize. I don't need excuses. Whitman leaned back in his chair. I need reliability. We called you back for this interview as a courtesy. Your qualifications are impressive, but 3 years is a long gap. We're willing to overlook that if we see someone serious, someone professional. I am serious. Are you? Whitman gestured at the clock on the wall. Because showing up 22 minutes late tells me you don't value our time. It tells me you're not ready for a position at this level. Ethan's hands tightened on his portfolio. There was a situation on the highway. Someone needed help. And you chose to help them instead of being on time for your interview. Yes, that was poor judgment. It was the right thing to do, Egg. Whitman's expression didn't change. Mr. Cole, this firm handles billion-dollar projects. We work with deadlines that don't care about your personal ethics. If we give you a structural analysis that needs to be on a client's desk by 9 a.m., and you show up at 9:20 because you stopped to help someone on the highway, what do you think happens? That's not... We lose the client. We lose the contract. We lose millions of dollars. Whitman stood. I'm sorry, Mr. Cole. You're clearly talented, but you're not what we need. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He stood there, portfolio in hand, and felt his entire future collapse. Please, he heard himself say. Just look at my work. Give me 5 minutes. I don't need 5 minutes. This interview is over. I have a daughter. She's 6 years old. I'm 2 months behind on rent. This job, is not a charity position. Whitman's voice was final. Good luck, Mr. Cole. Ethan walked out of that office in a daze. He took the elevator down 23 floors and walked through the marble lobby and out into the cold October morning, and he didn't stop walking until he reached his truck in the parking garage. Then he sat behind the wheel and put his head in his hands. He'd done it again. Thrown everything away. For what? For a stranger in a broken-down car who would go back to her expensive life and never think about him again? His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. How did it go? Ethan stared at the screen. He couldn't answer, couldn't face telling her he'd failed, again. He started the truck and drove out of the parking garage, back into the mess of downtown traffic, heading nowhere in particular. The business card Victoria had given him was still in his pocket. He pulled it out at a red light and looked at it. Executive Vice President, Hale Global Developments. She'd probably meant it when she said to call if he needed anything. People in her position said things like that. They never expected anyone to actually call. Ethan crumpled the card and threw it on the dashboard. Then he drove back to his mother's house to pick up Lily, trying to figure out how he was going to explain that Daddy had messed up the job thing. That night, after Lily was asleep behind her curtain, Ethan sat at the tiny kitchen table with a stack of bills he couldn't pay. Rent, electricity, Lily's school lunch account, the minimum payment on his credit card. He'd been doing this for 3 years, working construction, hauling concrete and drywall and lumber for $12 an hour. Coming home with a back that ached and hands that bled, barely scraping by, barely keeping them in this terrible apartment. And today he'd thrown away the one chance to change it. His phone rang. Unknown number. Ethan almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Hello? Mr. Cole? A woman's voice, professional. This is Jennifer from Pierce, Whitman and Associates. I'm calling to inform you that your application has been rejected. We appreciate your interest in our firm. I know, Ethan said quietly. Mr. Whitman already told me. I'm required to make the official notification. Have a good evening. She hung up before Ethan could respond. He set the phone down and stared at the bills spread across the table. Numbers that didn't add up. A future that didn't exist. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the hanging curtain, Lily stirred in her sleep and murmured something he couldn't hear, probably dreaming. She was always dreaming, about having her own room, about going to the zoo, about things 6-year-olds wanted that Ethan couldn't give her. He'd failed her. Again. Ethan pushed back from the table and walked to the narrow window that looked out over the parking lot. 4:30 in the morning would come soon enough. Another construction site. Another day of hauling materials for men half his age who screamed at him when he wasn't fast enough. He thought about the moment on the highway when he'd seen Victoria standing beside her car. The moment his foot had moved toward the brake. He should have kept driving. But even now, standing in his miserable apartment with his ruined future crumbling around him, Ethan couldn't make himself believe that. Because his mother was wrong. The world wasn't just about making the smart choice or the practical choice. It was about being the kind of person your daughter could look up to. The kind of person Rebecca would have been proud of. Even if it cost him everything. Ethan turned away from the window and went to check on Lily one more time. She was sleeping peacefully, the stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. He stood there watching her breathe, and he made himself a promise. He would find another way. He didn't know how, but he would find it. Because that's what fathers did. They didn't give up. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of concrete dust and exhaustion. Ethan worked every shift he could get, sometimes pulling 16-hour days on different sites across the city. His body moved on autopilot, lifting, carrying, hammering, hauling. His mind existed somewhere else entirely, trapped in that corner office, with Richard Whitman's cold dismissal echoing in his skull. You're not what we need, The words had burrowed under his skin and made a home there. At night, lying awake on his too-thin mattress, Ethan replayed the interview on an endless loop. He should have lied about why he was late. He should have kept his mouth shut about helping Victoria. He should have never stopped in the first place. But every time he circled back to that thought, he saw Lily's face, saw her straightening his tie with her small fingers, saw the way she looked at him like he was someone worth admiring. What kind of man would he be if he'd just driven past someone who needed help? The question had no good answer, so Ethan stopped asking it. He focused on work instead, on keeping his head down and his mouth shut, and collecting whatever paycheck they'd give him. On a cold Tuesday morning, 3 weeks and 2 days after the failed interview, Ethan reported to a new site downtown. The foreman, a barrel-chested man named Martinez, handed out assignments with the enthusiasm of someone reading a death sentence. Colt, you're on rebar delivery. Truck's coming at 8. You and Davis handle the offload. But Ethan nodded and grabbed his gloves. The site was massive. a new commercial development that would eventually become luxury condos and street-level retail. Right now, it was just a hole in the ground surrounded by chain-link fence and construction equipment. The foundation was going in this week. Everything smelled like diesel and wet concrete. Davis was a kid barely out of high school with arms like tree branches and a work ethic that put Ethan to shame. They worked in silence, unloading 60-pound bundles of rebar from the delivery truck and stacking them according to Martinez's shouted instructions. By 10 o'clock, Ethan's back was screaming. By noon, his hands were bleeding through his gloves. He didn't complain. Nobody wanted to hear it. During lunch break, he sat on an overturned bucket and ate the peanut butter sandwich he'd packed that morning. Around him, the other workers clustered in small groups, talking about football and weekend plans, and who was sleeping with whose ex-wife. Ethan stayed separate. He always did. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. Lily's teacher called. Field trip next month. $35. Can you cover it? $35. For most people, nothing. For Ethan, it meant skipping meals for a week. He typed back, "I'll figure it out." His mother's response came immediately. "You always say that." Ethan shoved the phone back in his pocket and finished his sandwich. Around him, the construction site hummed with the sounds of progress, generators running, equipment beeping, men yelling over the noise. This was his life now. This was all it would ever be. He was crumpling up the sandwich wrapper when Martinez's voice cut through the noise. "Clear the site! Everyone back to the fence line! Whoa!" Ethan looked up. Martinez was waving his arms, his face tight with something that looked like panic. Around the site, workers stopped what they were doing and turned to stare. "Move! Now! Clear the perimeter!" The workers started walking toward the fence, confused muttering rippling through the crowd. Ethan stood and followed, his boots crunching over gravel. Whatever this was, it didn't sound like a safety drill. Then he saw the vehicles. 3 black SUVs rolled up to the site entrance, sleek and expensive and completely out of place. They parked in a line along the curb, and for a moment nobody moved. Then the doors opened. Men in suits stepped out first. Not construction supervisors, corporate types carrying tablets and briefcases, their shoes too polished for a job site. Behind them came more people, executives, Ethan guessed, based on the way they carried themselves. The kind of people who made decisions in boardrooms and never got dirt under their fingernails. Martinez was already hurrying toward them, his earlier panic transforming into something like desperate politeness. Ethan watched from his spot by the fence as the foreman shook hands with a tall man in a gray suit. "What's going on?" Davis asked, appearing at Ethan's elbow. "No idea. Think we're getting shut down?" Maybe. But it didn't feel like a shutdown. It felt like something else, something bigger. The group of executives stood near the site entrance, conferring among themselves while Martinez gestured at the foundation excavation. One of the suited men was taking photographs on his phone. Another was making notes on a tablet. The whole thing had the feeling of an inspection, though Ethan couldn't imagine what kind of inspection required 3 SUVs worth of corporate presence. Then the third vehicle's rear door opened and everything stopped. A woman stepped out. She was wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Ethan made in 6 months, her dark hair pulled back in the same professional style he remembered. Even from 50 feet away, even surrounded by executives and construction workers and the chaos of the job site, she commanded attention in a way that had nothing to do with volume and everything to do with presence. Victoria Hale. Ethan's breath caught in his chest. She moved through the cluster of executives with easy confidence, listening to something one of the suited men was saying while her eyes scanned the site. She looked exactly how Ethan remembered. Controlled, professional, untouchable. The kind of person who belonged in boardrooms, not standing in construction mud. "Who's that?" Davis asked. Ethan couldn't answer. His throat had closed up. Victoria was walking now, moving away from the executives toward the fence line where the workers stood watching. Martinez hurried after her, talking rapidly, but she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the workers. She was looking for someone. Their eyes met across 50 feet of dirt and machinery, and Ethan saw recognition flash across her face. She started walking faster. "Oh, hell," Ethan muttered. Around him, the other workers were starting to notice, starting to track where Victoria's attention was focused. Martinez had stopped talking and was now following her gaze, his expression shifting from confusion to something like alarm. Victoria walked straight through the crowd of workers like they weren't there, straight toward Ethan. She stopped 3 feet in front of him, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Up close, Ethan could see that the controlled exterior was just barely holding. Underneath it, she looked relieved, almost desperately so. "Ethan," she said, "I've been looking for you." Every worker within earshot went quiet. Even the machinery seemed to pause. Ethan was aware of 50 pairs of eyes on him, of Martinez standing 10 feet away with his mouth hanging open, of Davis practically vibrating with confusion beside him. "Victoria," Ethan managed, "what are you doing here? What am I—" She let out a breath that might have been a laugh if it hadn't sounded so strained. "I've spent 3 weeks trying to find you. Do you have any idea how many construction sites there are in this city?" "I don't understand." "The interview." Victoria's voice dropped, became more urgent. "The one you missed because of me. I found out what happened." Ethan's stomach dropped. "How did you—" "I made some calls. I have friends at Pierce, Whitman. They told me about your interview." Her expression shifted into something harder. "They told me Richard Whitman rejected you because you were late." Martinez chose that moment to insert himself into the conversation. "Excuse me, Ms. Hale, but we're on a tight schedule here. If you need to speak with one of the workers, maybe we could arrange—" Victoria turned to look at him, and whatever Martinez saw in her face made him take a step back. "Give us a minute," she said. It wasn't a request. Martinez nodded and retreated. The other executives who'd been hovering nearby did the same, creating a bubble of space around Ethan and Victoria. When she turned back, her voice was quieter. "You lost that job because you stopped to help me. It wasn't your fault." "Of course it was my fault. If I hadn't been stranded on that highway—" "You didn't ask me to stop," Ethan cut in. "I made that choice. And it cost you everything." Victoria's hands clenched at her sides. "Do you have any idea what that job would have meant? The salary, the benefits? I know what it would have meant." "Then why are you standing here like it doesn't matter?" "Because it does matter." Ethan's voice came out rougher than he intended. "But I can't go back and change it, so I'm dealing with it." Victoria stared at him for a long moment. Around them, the construction site had gone completely silent. Every worker was watching, pretending not to watch, absolutely riveted. "You're dealing with it," Victoria repeated slowly, "by working construction jobs for minimum wage. It's what I've got. It's not what you deserve." Ethan let out a harsh laugh. "Deserve doesn't pay rent. But ipas sempu modsem." "No, but I can." Victoria pulled something from her purse. A business card, different from the first one. "I called Pierce, Whitman. I explained what happened. I told them you were late because you were helping me, and that if they rejected you over it, they made a mistake." Ethan's chest tightened. Victoria, Ethan's chest. "They're willing to give you another interview, a real one this time, with the full partnership, not just Whitman." She held out the card. "It's scheduled for next Monday at 10 a.m. All you have to do is show up." He didn't take the card. "Why would you do this?" "Because you sacrificed your future to help me. The least I can do is try to give it back." "You don't owe me anything." "Yes, I do." Her voice went hard. "You stopped when no one else would. You made yourself late for the most important interview of your life because I was stranded on a highway. That means something." "It was just the right thing to do." "Exactly." Victoria's expression softened. "And the right thing for me to do is make sure you get a fair shot. So please, take the card." Ethan looked at the business card in her hand. Behind her, Martinez was watching with naked curiosity. The other workers weren't even pretending to work anymore. This whole interaction was going to be the talk of every construction site in the city by tomorrow. He took the card. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Don't thank me, just show up on Monday." Victoria glanced around at the watching workers, then back at Ethan. "And maybe wear a different shirt. That one's got concrete dust all over it." Despite everything, Ethan almost smiled. "I'll keep that in mind." Victoria nodded once, sharp and businesslike, then turned and walked back toward the executives. They fell in around her immediately, and within minutes the whole group was loading back into the SUVs. Martinez followed them out to the curb, bowing and scraping like they were royalty. The SUVs pulled away, and the construction site stayed silent for about 10 more seconds. Then Davis grabbed Ethan's arm. What the hell was that? Long story. That was Victoria Hale. Do you know who Victoria Hale is? I'm getting the impression I should. She's only one of the richest developers in the country. Davis looked like he might pass out. Hale Global Developments owns half the commercial real estate downtown. She's worth like billions. Ethan stared at the business card in his hand. Victoria Hale, CEO. Hale Global Developments. Different title than the last card. Higher position. Billions, he repeated faintly. And she just walked onto our site looking for you. Davis was practically shaking him. What did you do? How do you know her? I gave her a ride. You gave her a... Davis stopped, processing. That's it? That's it. Man. Davis released Ethan's arm and ran a hand through his hair. You must give really good rides. Around them, the other workers were starting to drift back toward their stations, but Ethan could feel their eyes on him. The new guy who apparently knew billionaires. The one Victoria Hale had personally come looking for. Martinez appeared at Ethan's shoulder, his expression caught between anger and confusion. Cole, my office. Now! Ethan followed the foreman across the site to the construction trailer that served as a mobile office. Inside, Martinez shut the door and rounded on him. You want to explain what just happened? Not really. That was Victoria Hale. I know. She owns this development. She owns 6 other developments in this city. She's the client. Martinez's voice climbed, and she walked onto my site asking for you by name. I helped her out a few weeks ago. She wanted to return the favor. By arranging a job interview? Apparently. Martinez stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head. You're full of surprises, Cole. I'm really not. Yeah, well, you've got an interview next Monday, which means you'll need Monday off. Martinez pulled out a clipboard and made a note. Don't screw it up this time. I won't. And Cole? Martinez looked up. Whatever you did to earn that kind of loyalty from someone like Victoria Hale, that's worth more than any paycheck I can give you. Don't forget that. Ethan left the trailer in a daze. He went back to work, went through the motions of unloading materials and following orders, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. That night, after he'd picked up Lily and made her dinner and put her to bed behind the hanging curtain, he sat at the kitchen table and stared at Victoria's business card. The interview was in 6 days. This time, he couldn't afford to be late. The next morning, Ethan woke up with a plan. He would prepare for this interview the way he should have prepared for the first one, thoroughly, professionally, without cutting corners. He spent his evenings after work reviewing engineering journals, updating his portfolio, practicing answers to common interview questions. His mother watched Lily without complaint, though she peppered him with questions every time he dropped her off. What did that woman say to you on the construction site? She got me another interview. The same firm? Yes. Why would she do that? Because she felt responsible. His mother's eyes narrowed. Is there something you're not telling me? No, Mom, because women like that don't just appear out of nowhere offering favors. She's not offering favors. She's fixing something that was her fault. Nothing is ever that simple. But maybe it was. Maybe Victoria was exactly what she appeared to be. Someone with enough power to correct an injustice and enough decency to actually do it. Ethan wanted to believe that. He needed to believe it. The days crawled past. Ethan worked his shifts, came home to Lily, prepared for the interview. He dry cleaned his suit. He got a haircut at a discount barber shop that took walk-ins. He reviewed his structural drawings until he could recite the load calculations in his sleep. On Sunday night, the night before the interview, Lily caught him standing in front of the bathroom mirror practicing his introduction. Daddy, why are you talking to yourself? Ethan turned to find her watching him from the doorway, the stuffed rabbit dangling from one hand. Just practicing. For the job thing? Yeah, baby, for the job thing. Lily walked into the bathroom and climbed onto the toilet lid so she could see herself in the mirror beside him. Grandma says this job is really important. It is. More important than the last one? Ethan knelt down so they were eye level. No, just as important. But this time, Daddy's going to do it right. You always do things right. Not always. Yes, always. Lily reached out and straightened his collar, even though he wasn't wearing the dress shirt yet. Mommy used to say you were the best at everything. Ethan's throat tightened. Your mommy was biased. What's biased? It means she loved me too much to be objective. What's objective? It means seeing things the way they really are. Lily considered this. I think Mommy was objective. You are the best. Ethan pulled her into a hug and held on tight. I love you, sweetheart. Love you too, Daddy. She pulled back and looked at him seriously. Are you going to get the job? I'm going to try really hard. Then you'll get it, because you always try hard. If only it were that simple. That night, Ethan barely slept. He lay awake watching the shadows move across the ceiling, running through scenarios in his head. What if he got stuck in traffic again? What if the interview panel hated him? What if Victoria's intervention had only made things worse? At 4:30, he gave up and got out of bed. By 7 o'clock, he was dressed and ready. The suit fit better after the dry cleaning. The tie was straight. His portfolio was organized and professional. He looked like someone who belonged in a firm like Pierce, Whitman, and Associates. He looked like the man he used to be. Lily woke up while he was making coffee. She stumbled out from behind the curtain, took one look at him, and smiled. You look fancy. Just like last time? Fancier. Oh. Ethan dropped her at his mother's house at 7:30. Carol took one look at him and nodded. Better, she said. Much better. Thanks, Mom. Don't thank me, just get the job. She paused. And Ethan, whatever happens today, you did the right thing on that highway. Don't let anyone make you think otherwise. The words stayed with Ethan all the way downtown. He drove carefully, left early, gave himself 90 minutes for a 40-minute drive. He reached Madison Tower at 8:45 and parked in the same garage he'd used last time. Then he sat in his truck and breathed. He had an hour and 15 minutes, plenty of time. At 9:30, Ethan walked into the lobby of Madison Tower. At 9:45, he took the elevator to the 23rd floor. At 9:50, he walked through the glass doors of Pierce, Whitman and Associates, and gave his name to the receptionist. She smiled, a real smile this time, warm and professional. Mr. Cole, right on time, please have a seat. They'll be with you shortly. Ethan sat in the same leather chair he'd occupied 3 weeks ago. But this time, everything felt different. This time, he was ready. At exactly 10 o'clock, the receptionist stood. Mr. Cole, they're ready for you. She led him down the hallway, but instead of turning toward Whitman's corner office, she walked past it to a large conference room at the end of the hall. She opened the door and gestured for him to enter. The room was dominated by a long table surrounded by high-backed chairs. 4 people sat along one side, watching him enter. Ethan recognized Richard Whitman immediately. Same cold expression, same expensive suit. Beside him sat a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and sharp eyes. Next to her, a younger man with glasses who was already reviewing something on a tablet. And at the head of the table, a distinguished-looking man in his 70s who radiated authority. Mr. Cole, the older man said, standing and extending his hand. I'm Jonathan Pierce. Thank you for coming. Ethan shook his hand, then the hands of the other partners. The woman was Margaret Santos, senior structural engineer. The younger man was David Chen, project management lead. Whitman didn't offer his hand, but Ethan hadn't expected him to. Please sit. Pierce gestured to the chair across from them. Ethan sat and placed his portfolio on the table in front of him. 4 pairs of eyes studied him with varying degrees of interest. Whitman's expression suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. Mr. Cole, Pierce began, I understand you've already met with Richard. I also understand that interview didn't go as planned. No, sir, it didn't. We've since learned the circumstances surrounding your tardiness. Pierce glanced at Whitman, then back at Ethan. Ms. Hale reached out to us personally. She explained the situation. Ethan kept his expression neutral. She didn't need to do that. Perhaps not. But she did, and she was quite persuasive. Pierce smiled slightly. She seems to believe very strongly in your character. I appreciate her confidence. Do you believe it was the right decision? This came from Whitman, his voice sharp. Stopping to help a stranger when you knew it would make you late? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Ethan could feel the weight of it, the way it was designed to make him backtrack, or apologize, or show weakness. He met Whitman's eyes directly. Yes, sir, I do. Even though it cost you this opportunity? It didn't cost me the opportunity. You did, when you decided being 20 minutes late was more important than my qualifications. Whitman's expression darkened. That's honest, Pierce interrupted smoothly. And fair. Continue, Mr. Cole. Ethan took a breath. I'm not going to apologize for helping someone who needed it. I understand that this firm values punctuality and professionalism. So do I. But I also value being the kind of person my daughter can respect. The kind of person who doesn't leave someone stranded on a highway just to make a meeting on time. He paused. If that makes me unreliable in your eyes, then maybe we're not a good fit. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Margaret Santos laughed, a short, sharp sound that broke the tension like glass shattering. Well, at least he's honest. Indeed. Pierce was smiling now genuinely. Mr. Cole, why don't you show us your portfolio? Me asi papasast. The next hour passed in a blur of technical questions and structural analysis. Ethan walked them through his bridge design, explained his approach to load distribution, discussed material selection and environmental factors. The partners asked challenging questions, and Ethan answered them without hesitation. This was his element. This was what he was good at. Even Whitman seemed grudgingly impressed by the end. Your work is excellent, Margaret said, closing the portfolio. Your approach to tension management is particularly innovative. Thank you. 3-year gap in employment, David Chen said, looking up from his tablet. Can you explain that? Ethan had prepared for this question. He'd practiced the answer a dozen times. But sitting here, facing people who might actually give him a chance, he found he didn't want to hide behind careful phrasing. My wife died 3 years ago, he said simply. Car accident. I had a 6-year-old daughter and no support system. I couldn't work full-time engineering hours and be a single parent, so I made a choice. And now? Pierce asked gently. Now I have childcare figured out. Now I'm ready to come back. Why should we hire you instead of someone without a 3-year gap? Because I'm better than someone without a gap. Ethan kept his voice level. Because I spent 3 years on construction sites learning exactly how buildings actually get built. Because I understand what happens when structural engineers design things that sound good on paper but fall apart in practice. Because I'm not doing this for my ego. I'm doing it for my daughter. And that means I won't cut corners or chase flashy projects. I'll do solid work that lasts. Pierce exchanged glances with the other partners. Even Whitman looked thoughtful. Thank you, Mr. Cole, Pierce said finally. We'll be in touch. Ethan shook hands again and left the conference room. He walked through the lobby, took the elevator down, crossed to the parking garage. He didn't let himself think about how it had gone. Didn't let himself hope. He'd done his best. That was all he could do. He was halfway home when his phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Mr. Cole? A woman's voice, professional but warm. This is Margaret Santos from Pierce, Whitman and Associates. Do you have a moment? Ethan pulled over to the side of the road. His hands were shaking. Yes. I wanted to personally inform you that we'd like to offer you a position as senior structural engineer. Starting salary is $95,000 annually, plus full benefits and retirement matching. We'd like you to start in 2 weeks if possible. The world tilted sideways. Ethan gripped the steering wheel with both hands and tried to remember how to breathe. Mr. Cole? Are you there? I'm here. His voice broke. Yes, I accept. Excellent. We'll send over the formal offer letter and onboarding paperwork this afternoon. Welcome to Pierce, Whitman and Associates. She hung up. Ethan sat on the side of the road, phone still pressed to his ear, and felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Relief. Pure, overwhelming relief. He'd done it. He called his mother first. She cried. Then he went to pick up Lily from school early, which he'd never done before. When she came running out of the building and saw him waiting by the truck, her whole face lit up. Daddy, what are you doing here? Ethan scooped her up and spun her around. I got the job, sweetheart. The job thing? Yeah, baby, the job thing. And Lily squealed and threw her arms around his neck. I knew you would. I told you. That night, Ethan let her stay up past bedtime. They got ice cream from the corner store and sat on the rickety fire escape outside their apartment watching the city lights. Lily chattered about school and friends and all the things she wanted now that Daddy had a real job again. A bike, art supplies, maybe a pet fish. "We'll see what we can do," Ethan said, pulling her close. "Are we going to move?" "Eventually, somewhere nicer, somewhere you can have your own room." "Really?" "Really." Lily was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Was it because of the lady? The one from the highway?" Ethan thought about Victoria walking through the construction site looking for him, about her calling Pierce, Whitman, and making them reconsider, about the way she'd looked at him when she said, "That means something." "Yeah," he said finally. "It was because of her. Then I like her." "Oh, me too, kiddo. Me too." 3 days later, a package arrived at their apartment. Inside was a handwritten note on expensive stationery. "Congratulations on the job. You earned it. V.H." Beneath the note was a gift certificate to a children's clothing store and a second note in different handwriting. "For Lily. Every girl deserves a fresh start." Ethan stood in his tiny kitchen holding the note and felt his eyes burn. He didn't deserve this kindness. Didn't deserve someone like Victoria Hale caring enough to make sure his daughter had new clothes. But here it was anyway. He tucked the note into his wallet, right next to the photo of Rebecca. 2 women who'd changed his life. One he'd lost forever. One who'd appeared out of nowhere and refused to let him drown. Maybe his mother was wrong. Maybe the world wasn't just about making smart choices. Maybe sometimes it was about making human ones, even when they cost you everything, and trusting that somehow it would work out. Ethan looked around the cramped apartment, at the hanging curtain that separated Lily's corner from his, at the water stains and cracked linoleum, and all the marks of 3 years spent barely surviving. In 2 weeks, he'd start his new job. In 2 months, they'd move somewhere better. And eventually, this place would just be a memory, a reminder of how far they'd climbed. But tonight, standing in this terrible apartment with Victoria's note in his hand and his daughter sleeping peacefully behind the curtain, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. Ethan's first day at Pierce, Whitman and Associates started with paperwork and ended with vertigo. The HR manager, a cheerful woman named Patricia, spent 2 hours walking him through benefit selections, retirement contributions, and company policies. She handed him a security badge, a laptop, and a key card for the executive parking garage. The parking garage alone felt surreal. 3 years ago, he'd been parking on the street and feeding quarters into meters. Now he had an assigned spot on the 5th level with his name stenciled on the concrete wall. "You'll be working with Margaret Santos primarily," Patricia explained as she led him through the office. "She heads up our infrastructure division. You'll have your own office on 22, 1 floor down from the partners." His own office. Ethan had shared a desk in his last engineering job back before Rebecca died. The idea of having 4 walls and a door that closed felt almost decadent. The office turned out to be small but functional, with a window overlooking the downtown skyline and enough space for a proper drafting table. Someone had already set up his computer and left a welcome basket on the desk. Expensive coffee, a Pierce Whitman mug, and a leather-bound notebook embossed with the firm's logo. "Margaret wants to see you at 11, Patricia said, checking her phone. "That gives you about an hour to get settled. If you need anything, I'm on 23. After she left, Ethan stood in his office and tried to process the fact that this was real. He had a job, a career, a future that extended beyond the next rent payment. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother with a photo of Lily holding up a sign she'd made. "Good luck, Daddy!" The letters were crooked and decorated with glitter. Ethan saved the photo and got to work unpacking his portfolio. At 11 sharp, he found Margaret Santos in her office, reviewing blueprints spread across a conference table. She looked up when he knocked and waved him in. "Ethan, good, you're punctual. Close the door." He did. Margaret gestured to the blueprints. "What do you see?" Ethan stepped closer and studied the drawings. They showed a proposed pedestrian bridge spanning a river. Elegant lines and careful engineering, but something about the support structure made him uneasy. "The cable tensioning looks off," he said after a moment. "You're going to get oscillation problems in high wind." "That's what I thought." Margaret tapped the blueprint. "The client insists this design is fine. They hired another firm for the initial specs and don't want to hear that we think it needs revision." "So what do you want me to do? Like, prove it," Margaret handed him a folder. Run the calculations. Model the stress patterns. I want a full analysis on my desk by Friday showing exactly why this design will fail. Ethan took the folder. And if the client still won't listen, then we walk away from the project. This firm doesn't put our name on bridges that collapse. She gave him a sharp look. That's not how we operate here, understood? Understood. Good. Now get out of here and show me what you can do. The next 3 days, Ethan barely came up for air. He ran simulations, built stress models, calculated wind load coefficients until the numbers blurred together. He stayed late each night, working long after the rest of the office had emptied out, driven by something more than professional pride. This was his chance to prove he belonged here, that the 3-year gap didn't matter, that he was still as good as he'd ever been. Maybe better. On Thursday evening, he was deep in a calculation when someone knocked on his office door. Ethan looked up, expecting to see the janitor. Instead, Victoria Hale stood in his doorway wearing a navy dress and heels, looking like she'd stepped out of a business magazine. Victoria. Ethan stood up so fast he nearly knocked over his coffee. What are you doing here? Well, I had a meeting with Jonathan Pierce about a development project. Thought I'd stop by and see how you're settling in. She glanced around his office. She glanced around his, taking in the blueprints covering his desk and the half-empty coffee cups. Working late? Bridge analysis. It's due tomorrow. Mind if I come in? Ethan gestured to the chair across from his desk. Victoria sat down and crossed her legs, perfectly composed. Meanwhile, Ethan was acutely aware that his tie was loosened and his shirt sleeves were rolled up, and he probably looked like he'd been run over by a truck. You look tired, Victoria observed. I'm fine. How's Lily? The question caught him off guard. She's good. Excited that I'm working normal hours again. I imagine that's been an adjustment for both of you. Whoa. A good one. Ethan sat back down. Victoria, I never properly thanked you for what you did. Calling Pierce, arranging the interview. You already thanked me. I sent a text message. That's not the same. It was sufficient. Victoria's expression softened slightly. How are you really doing, Ethan? He could have given her the polished answer, the professional one. But something about the way she was looking at him made him want to be honest. I'm terrified, he admitted. I've got 3 years of rust to shake off. Everyone here has been working continuously while I was hauling concrete. What if I can't keep up? You'll keep up? You sound very sure. I am sure. I've seen the way you approach problems. You stopped on a highway to help a stranger when it cost you everything. That's the same instinct that makes you triple-check your calculations and stay late running simulations. Victoria leaned forward. You care about doing things right. That's rare. Ethan didn't know what to say to that. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable exactly, but weighted with something he couldn't name. I should let you get back to work, Victoria said, finally standing. But Ethan, don't work yourself into the ground trying to prove something. You've already proven it. After she left, Ethan sat at his desk for a long time, staring at the doorway where she'd stood. He wasn't sure what had just happened, but it felt significant in a way he didn't quite understand. He finished the bridge analysis at 2 a.m. and left it on Margaret's desk before heading home. Friday afternoon, Margaret called him into her office. The analysis was spread across her conference table, covered in her handwritten notes. This is excellent work, she said without preamble. Your wind load modeling is particularly thorough. Thank you. I'm presenting this to the client Monday morning. I want you there. Ethan blinked. Me? You did the analysis. You should be there to defend it. Margaret gave him an appraising look. Think you can handle it? Yes. Good. Meeting's at 9. Don't be late. The client meeting turned out to be less of a meeting and more of a controlled explosion. The client, a developer named Richard Foster, spent 20 minutes arguing that Ethan's calculations were overly conservative. Margaret spent 20 minutes calmly dismantling his arguments. Ethan sat at the conference table and tried not to look like he wanted to crawl under it. Your engineer is being unnecessarily cautious, Foster said, jabbing a finger at the analysis. We've built dozens of bridges with similar specs, and how many of those bridges have been shut down for emergency repairs? Margaret asked coolly. Foster's jaw tightened. That's not... Because according to my research, at least 3 of your recent bridge projects have experienced structural issues within the first 2 years of operation. She slid a folder across the table. All of them had the same design flaw Mr. Cole identified in your current proposal. Foster opened the folder and went pale. You have two options, Margaret continued. Revise the design according to our specifications, or find another firm willing to stake their reputation on a bridge that will fail. Your choice. Foster left the meeting 15 minutes later, having agreed to every revision Margaret demanded. As soon as the conference room door closed behind him, she turned to Ethan. Well done. Your analysis just saved that man from a lawsuit. He didn't seem grateful. He'll be grateful when his bridge is still standing in 20 years. Margaret gathered her papers. You handled yourself well in there, didn't fold under pressure. I wasn't sure you wanted me to speak. I didn't. You're too new. But you were ready to if I'd asked, and that's what matters. She paused at the door. Keep this up and you'll be running your own projects by the end of the year. Shai, her own projects. Ethan let the words sink in as he walked back to his office. 6 months ago, he'd been hauling drywall. Now he was being told he might lead major engineering projects. The vertigo was back. Over the next 2 months, Ethan settled into a routine that felt almost normal. He dropped Lily at school each morning, worked a full day at the firm, picked her up in the evening. His mother stopped giving him the look that said she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. His bank account slowly climbed above zero. He paid off his credit card. He bought Lily new shoes without having to check his account balance first. Small things, normal things, things that felt like miracles. In early December, Margaret assigned him to a mid-sized commercial project, structural engineering for a new office building downtown. Nothing groundbreaking, but significant enough that Ethan felt the weight of responsibility every time he reviewed the specs. He was working late on the load calculations when Victoria appeared in his doorway again. This time she was wearing jeans and a sweater, her hair down around her shoulders. She looked younger, more approachable. You're here late again, she observed. Ethan glanced at his watch. 8:30. I didn't realize how late it was. Have you eaten? I had lunch. That was 8 hours ago. Victoria leaned against the doorframe. Come on, there's a Thai place 2 blocks from here. My treat. Victoria, you don't have to. I'm hungry, and I don't like eating alone. Consider it a favor to me. 20 minutes later, they were sitting in a small restaurant with dim lighting and the smell of basil and lemongrass in the air. Victoria ordered in Thai. Fluent, confident, and the server brought them tea while they waited for the food. I didn't know you spoke Thai, Ethan said. I spent 2 years working in Bangkok after college. Real estate development project. Victoria smiled slightly. It was supposed to be a 6-month assignment, but I fell in love with the city. What brought you back? My father got sick. I came home to help run the company and never left. She took a sip of tea. That was 8 years ago. I'm sorry about your father. Don't be. He was difficult on his best days and impossible on his worst. We had a complicated relationship. Victoria set down her tea. What about you? Your mother seems close with Lily. She is. My mom basically raised Lily for the first year after Rebecca died. I was a mess. That must have been impossibly hard. It was. Ethan traced the rim of his cup. The worst part was watching Lily ask when Mommy was coming home and not knowing how to explain that she wasn't. Victoria was quiet for a moment. How old was Lily when it happened? 3. Young enough that her memories of Rebecca are already starting to fade. His throat tightened. She asked me last week what her mom's favorite color was. She couldn't remember. That's not your fault. Doesn't make it easier. The food arrived, and they ate in comfortable silence for a while. Ethan couldn't remember the last time he'd had a meal that didn't involve chicken nuggets or macaroni and cheese. The curry was incredible, complex, and perfectly spiced. This is really good, he said. Better than construction site lunch? Significantly. Victoria smiled. I wanted to ask you something. Next week, Hale Global is hosting a charity gala. Black tie, very formal. All the usual downtown elite. She paused. I'd like you to come. Ethan nearly choked on his curry. Why? Because I think you'd enjoy it, and because I could use someone there who doesn't spend the entire evening networking. I don't own a tux. That's what rentals are for. Victoria, I don't exactly fit into that world. Neither do I, most of the time. But it's part of my job, and having someone there I actually like talking to would make it bearable. She met his eyes. Please? Ethan thought about all the reasons this was a bad idea. He'd be surrounded by billionaires and socialites and people who'd never worked a day of physical labor in their lives. He'd say something wrong or use the wrong fork or generally humiliate himself. But Victoria was looking at him with something that might have been hope, and he found he didn't want to disappoint her. Okay, he heard himself say. I'll go. Victoria's face lit up. Really? Really? But I'm warning you, I'm terrible at small talk. Good. I hate small talk. She raised her teacup. To uncomfortable social situations. Ethan clinked his cup against hers. To uncomfortable social situations. The week leading up to the gala, Ethan tried not to panic. He rented a tux that fit reasonably well and bought new dress shoes that gave him blisters during the fitting. His mother was delighted when he told her he had a formal event to attend, less delighted when he mentioned it was Victoria Hale's charity gala. You're going as her date? Carol asked, her eyes sharp. I'm going as her friend. Friends don't invite friends to black tie charity events. Mom, I'm just saying, be careful. There's nothing to be careful about. Victoria's been kind to me, that's all. But the night of the gala, when Ethan saw Victoria in her dress, a floor-length emerald gown that should have been illegal, he wondered if his mother might have a point. Victoria smiled when she saw him. You clean up nicely. You look incredible. Thank you. She adjusted his bow tie, which he'd managed to get slightly crooked. Ready? No. Good. Neither am I. The gala was held at one of the city's most expensive hotels, in a ballroom that probably cost more to rent than Ethan's annual salary. Everything was gold and crystal in excess, hundreds of people in formal wear drinking champagne and pretending to care about whatever charity this was supposed to benefit. Victoria was immediately pulled into conversations with people Ethan didn't recognize. He stood beside her, feeling massively out of place, while she navigated the social politics with practiced ease. She introduced him as my friend Ethan Cole, structural engineer at Pierce Whitman, and most people nodded politely before turning their attention back to Victoria. An hour in, Ethan excused himself to find the bar. He was waiting for a drink when a man in his 60s appeared beside him. You're Victoria's guest. It wasn't a question. Ethan turned to find a silver-haired man in an expensive suit studying him with unconcealed curiosity. I am. Robert Hale, Victoria's uncle. He offered his hand. I don't believe we've met. Ethan shook it. Ethan Cole. Yes, I know. Victoria's mentioned you. Robert ordered a scotch and gave Ethan an appraising look. She doesn't usually bring guests to these things. I think she felt sorry for me. Well, I doubt that. My niece doesn't do anything out of pity. Robert took his drink from the bartender. How did you meet? I gave her a ride when her car broke down. And she tracked you down and got you a job at Pierce Whitman? So Victoria's family knew about that. Ethan wasn't sure whether to be flattered or concerned. Something like that, he said. Interesting. Robert sipped his scotch. Be good to her, Mr. Cole. Victoria acts tough, but she's had enough people in her life who've disappointed her. Before Ethan could respond, Robert walked away, leaving him standing at the bar wondering what the hell that conversation had been about. He found Victoria 20 minutes later standing alone on a balcony overlooking the city. She'd kicked off her heels and was leaning against the railing, champagne glass in hand. Hiding? Ethan asked, stepping outside. Strategically retreating. Victoria glanced at him. These events exhaust me. Your uncle cornered me at the bar. Robert? What did he want? To warn me to be good to you. Victoria closed her eyes. I'm going to kill him. He seems protective. He's meddling. There's a difference. She took a long sip of champagne. I'm sorry. My family can be a lot. It's fine. Ethan joined her at the railing. The city spread out below them, thousands of lights against the darkness. For what it's worth, I think he cares about you. He does, which is why he thinks he has a right to interrogate every man I speak to. Victoria set down her glass. My father built Hale Global from nothing. When he died, everyone expected me to fail. My uncle, the board, Every business reporter in the city. They thought I was too young, too inexperienced, too female. But you didn't fail. No. I worked 18 days for 3 years and proved them all wrong. And now they think I'm married to the company, that I don't have a life outside boardrooms and construction sites. She laughed, but it sounded bitter. Maybe they're right. You have friends. I have business associates. I have people who want something from me. She turned to look at him. That's why I asked you here, Ethan. Because you're the first person in years who helped me without expecting anything in return. The words hung between them in the cold December air. Ethan was acutely aware of how close she was standing, of the way the city lights reflected in her eyes. I should probably tell you something, he said quietly. I met you on possibly the worst day of my life. I was late to an interview that could have saved my daughter from poverty, and the only reason I stopped was because I was too stubborn to walk past someone who needed help. He paused. I didn't do it to be noble. I did it because I'm an idiot with bad judgment. Victoria smiled. You're not an idiot. Debatable. No, you're decent. That's rarer than you think. She reached out and straightened his bow tie again, even though it didn't need straightening. Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for inviting me. They stood there for another moment, the space between them charged with something Ethan couldn't name. Then Victoria stepped back and picked up her shoes. We should go back inside before people start gossiping. Are they gossiping? Probably. I brought a guest. That's basically a scandal in my world. They returned to the ballroom together, and Ethan spent the rest of the evening watching Victoria work the room with renewed appreciation. She was brilliant at this, charming donors, deflecting unwanted attention, making people feel important while giving away nothing real about herself. It looked exhausting. Near midnight, Victoria finally declared the event over and they escaped to her car. The driver took them back toward Ethan's apartment, the city passing by outside the darkened windows. I meant what I said earlier, Victoria said quietly. About you being different. Most people in my life want something. A business deal, an introduction, a favor. You just wanted to help. You've done more for me than I ever did for you. I gave you an opportunity you'd already earned. You gave me something I actually needed. She turned to look at him. Do you know what it's like? Constantly wondering if people like you for yourself or for what you can do for them? No, but I know what it's like wondering if you're enough. Ethan met her eyes. Wondering if you can provide for your kid, if you can keep a roof over her head, if you're failing her every single day. You're not failing her. How do you know, Mom? Because she drew you a good luck sign with crooked letters and glitter. Because she straightens your tie and tells you you're fancy. Because she has a father who loves her enough to sacrifice everything for her future. Victoria's voice was fierce. Trust me, Ethan, you're not failing. The car pulled up outside his building. Ethan looked at the shabby exterior, the broken light over the entrance, and felt a flash of embarrassment that Victoria was seeing where he lived. This is me, he said. Thank you for tonight. I actually enjoyed myself. Me too. He opened the door, then paused. Victoria, you're wrong about your family and the business reporters. You didn't prove them wrong. You proved you were right. There's a difference. He got out before she could respond, but through the car window he saw her smile. The next morning, Lily wanted to know everything about the fancy party. Ethan did his best to describe the ballroom and the chandeliers and the food, while leaving out the part where he'd spent half the evening terrified of using the wrong fork. Did you dance? Lily asked. No. Why not? I don't know how. Daddy? Everyone knows how to dance. Not me. Lily looked disappointed. Next time you should dance. I'll keep that in mind. Yeah. That week at work, Ethan threw himself into the commercial building project with renewed focus. The calculations were complex, the timeline aggressive, but he was starting to find his rhythm again, starting to feel like an engineer instead of an imposter wearing an engineer's clothes. On Thursday, Margaret stopped by his office with news. The Foster Bridge project? The one where you caught the design flaw? What about it? They broke ground last week using our revised specs. Foster called yesterday to say he wants Pierce, Whitman, to handle all the structural engineering for his next 3 projects. Margaret smiled. That's $7 million in contracts because of your analysis. Ethan sat back in his chair, stunned. 7 million? Us? The partners are impressed. Jonathan mentioned you specifically in the quarterly meeting. She paused. How would you feel about leading the next Foster project? It's a convention center. Big, complex, high profile. I've only been here 4 months, and you've already proven you can handle the pressure. So yes or no? Ethan thought about the cramped apartment, about Lily's crooked good luck sign, about Victoria telling him he'd already proven himself. Yes, he said. Definitely yes. Margaret left, and Ethan sat alone in his office watching the city through his window. 4 months ago, he'd been hauling concrete. Now he was being offered a chance to lead a $7 million project. His phone buzzed, a text from Victoria. Heard about the Foster contracts, congratulations. He typed back, how did you hear already? I have spies everywhere. Also, Jonathan Pierce and I serve on the same nonprofit board. He mentioned it. Should I be worried about these spies? Probably. Dinner Friday? My treat. We're celebrating. Ethan hesitated, fingers hovering over the keyboard. This felt like more than just friendly dinners. This felt like something shifting, something that could complicate the careful balance they'd established. But he typed back anyway. Okay, where? Surprise. I'll pick you up at 7. That Friday, Victoria's driver collected Ethan from his apartment and drove them to a restaurant Ethan had only read about in the newspaper. The kind of place that required reservations 6 months in advance and served portions that could fit on a teaspoon. Victoria had somehow secured a private corner table with a view of the river. This is too much, Ethan said as they sat down. It's a celebration. You're leading a major project. That's worth celebrating. I haven't done anything yet. You will. Victoria ordered wine without looking at the menu, the kind of casual confidence that came from years of expensive restaurants. Tell me about the convention center. Ethan described the project, warming to the subject as he always did when talking about structural engineering. Victoria listened with genuine interest, asking smart questions, understanding the challenges in ways most people wouldn't. You love this, she observed. I do. I forgot how much I loved it. I'm glad you remembered. The food came, tiny artistic arrangements that tasted better than they had any right to. They talked about work, about Lily's upcoming school performance, about everything and nothing. Somewhere between the second and third course, Ethan realized he was having the best time he'd had in years. Can I ask you something? Victoria said over dessert. Sure. Do you ever think about that morning on the highway? Ethan set down his fork. All the time. Do you regret it? Stopping? No. He met her eyes. Being late to the interview was one of the worst moments of my life, but I don't regret helping you. Why not? Because it was the right thing to do, and because he stopped, unsure how to finish the sentence. Because what? Because it brought you into my life, and I'm grateful for that. Victoria's expression softened. I'm grateful too. They sat there in the expensive restaurant with the river glittering outside the window, and Ethan felt something shift between them. Something that had been building since that morning on the highway, through construction sites and charity galas and late-night work sessions. Something that felt dangerous and inevitable in equal measure. Victoria drove him home herself that night, dismissing the driver. They sat in her car outside his building, engine idling, neither of them moving to leave. Ethan, Victoria said finally, I need to tell you something. Okay, I'm not good at this, at personal relationships. My last serious relationship ended 3 years ago when he told me I cared more about my company than I cared about him. She looked straight ahead, not at Ethan. He was probably right. Victoria! I'm telling you this because I like you, more than I should, given that I'm the reason you have your job. More than is probably smart for either of us. She finally turned to face him. But I can't help it. And I need to know if I'm reading this wrong. Ethan's heart was hammering. You're not reading it wrong. I'm not? No. He reached out and took her hand. I like you too. More than I should. More than makes sense, given everything. Victoria's fingers tightened around his. This could get complicated. Probably. Your job, my company, people will talk. Let them talk. Ethan shifted closer. I spent 3 years playing it safe, making careful choices, trying not to risk anything. It didn't make me happy. It just made me small. And now? Now I'm tired of being small. Victoria smiled, and it was the first genuinely unguarded expression Ethan had ever seen on her face. Good, because so am I. She leaned in and kissed him, soft and tentative at first, then deeper. Ethan's hand came up to cup her face, and for a moment the whole world narrowed to just this. Her lips on his, her fingers tangled in his shirt, the quiet sound of her breathing. When they finally pulled apart, Victoria was laughing. What? Ethan asked. I just kissed someone in my car like a teenager. I haven't done that in 15 years. How was it? Better than I remembered. She kissed him again, quick and light. You should go inside before your neighbors start gossiping. Probably smart. But neither of them moved. They sat there in this car, hands intertwined, smiling at each other like idiots. Finally, Ethan forced himself to open the door. Good night, Victoria. Good night, Ethan. He walked into his building and climbed the stairs to his apartment, and he couldn't stop smiling. Inside, his mother was asleep on the couch where she'd been watching Lily. Ethan covered her with a blanket and checked on his daughter, who was sprawled across her narrow bed with the stuffed rabbit clutched tight. Everything in his life was changing. The job, the apartment they'd soon leave, the careful walls he'd built around his heart. And for the first time in 3 years, Ethan wasn't afraid of the change. He was ready for it. The convention center project consumed Ethan's life in the best possible way. He spent his days buried in structural calculations and his evenings reviewing site surveys, transforming the empty lot on 5th Street into something that existed first in blueprints, then in 3-dimensional models that rotated on his computer screen. The building would be massive, 200,000 square feet of exhibition space, conference rooms, and a grand ballroom that could hold 1,500 people. Every beam, every column, every load-bearing wall had to be perfect. Margaret stopped by his office one morning in late January with coffee and a knowing look. You're working too hard again. Ethan glanced up from his computer. The prelim review is next week, and you'll be ready. You've run these calculations 3 times already. She set the coffee on his desk. Go home at a reasonable hour tonight. Spend time with your daughter. I will. I mean it, Ethan. This job will eat your whole life if you let it. After she left, Ethan sat back and rubbed his eyes. Margaret was right. He'd been staying late every night, driven by the need to prove he could handle a project this size. But Lily had complained last week that she never saw him anymore, and the guilt had been gnawing at him ever since. His phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. Dinner tonight? He typed back. Can't. Promised Lily I'd be home early. Bring her. I'll cook. Ethan stared at the message. In the 6 weeks since that kiss in Victoria's car, they'd been careful to keep their relationship private. Stolen dinners after Lily was asleep, phone calls late at night, moments carved out between work and parenthood. But Victoria had never offered to meet Lily, had never suggested stepping into that part of his life. Are you sure? He typed. Very sure. 7 p.m. I'll text you the address. That evening, Ethan stood outside Victoria's building with Lily's hand in his and tried not to feel completely out of his depth. The building was all glass and steel, the kind of place with a doorman and a lobby that looked like an art gallery. Lily pressed her nose against the glass door. Daddy, is this where your friend lives? Yeah, baby. It's fancy. Very fancy. The doorman let them in with a professional smile and directed them to the elevator. Victoria's apartment was on the 28th floor. When the doors opened, she was waiting in the hallway wearing jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked younger than Ethan had ever seen her. You must be Lily, Victoria said, crouching down to the girl's level. I've heard so much about you. Lily hid behind Ethan's leg, suddenly shy. Hi. Do you like pasta? I'm making spaghetti. I like spaghetti. Good. Come on in. Victoria's apartment was everything Ethan expected. High ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, furniture that probably cost more than his truck. But it didn't feel cold. Books lined the shelves, plants sat on the windowsills, and the kitchen smelled like garlic and tomatoes. Lily's shyness lasted approximately 5 minutes. By the time Victoria handed her a wooden spoon and asked if she wanted to help stir the sauce, Lily was chattering about school and her upcoming dance recital and the fish she wanted to get for her birthday. Ethan watched them from the counter, something warm expanding in his chest. Victoria listened to Lily with the same focused attention she gave to business meetings, asking questions about the dance recital costumes and whether fish needed to be walked like dogs. They don't need walks, Lily explained seriously, but they need food every day, and you have to clean the tank or they get sick. That sounds like a big responsibility. I'm responsible, Daddy says so. I believe it. Victoria glanced at Ethan. Your dad's pretty responsible too. He's the most responsible, Lily agreed. He never forgets anything. Ethan thought about all the school events he'd missed, all the bedtime stories he'd skipped because he was too exhausted, all the ways he'd failed to be enough. But Lily was looking at him like he'd hung the moon, and he couldn't bring himself to contradict her. They ate dinner at Victoria's dining table with the city spread out below them like a carpet of lights. Lily asked Victoria 100 questions. Where she worked, if she had kids, why her apartment was so high up, whether she was scared of heights. Victoria answered each one patiently, and Ethan saw something in her expression he'd never seen before. Softness. Real, unguarded softness. After dinner, Lily discovered Victoria's bookshelf and pulled out a picture book about marine animals. Victoria sat on the couch with Lily curled against her side, reading about dolphins and whales in a voice that made even Ethan want to listen. Watching them together, Ethan felt something shift. This wasn't just attraction anymore. This wasn't just two lonely people finding comfort in each other. This was something bigger, something that involved his daughter and Victoria's careful walls and the future Ethan had been too afraid to imagine. He was falling in love with her. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He was falling in love with Victoria Hale, billionaire developer, the woman who'd saved his life without meaning to. The woman who was reading to his daughter about humpback whales like it was the most natural thing in the world. Daddy, look! Lily held up the book. This whale is as big as a school bus. That's pretty big, Ethan managed. Victoria caught his eye over Lily's head, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe. Or recognition. She smiled and Ethan smiled back, and for a moment everything felt impossibly right. They left at 9, Lily yawning and clutching the whale book that Victoria insisted she borrow. In the elevator, Lily leaned against Ethan's side. I like her, Daddy. Yeah? She's nice, and she has lots of books. She does. Are you going to marry her? Ethan nearly choked. What? Like in the movies. When the daddy meets someone nice, they get married. It's not that simple, sweetheart. Why not? Because real life is more complicated than movies. Lily considered this. But you like her, right? Yeah, I like her. Then it's not that complicated. If only. The next week, Ethan presented his preliminary designs to the project stakeholders, a room full of developers, city officials, and Pierce Whitman partners. He'd practiced the presentation a dozen times, refined the slides until they were perfect, memorized every statistic and load calculation. It still terrified him. But when he stood at the front of the conference room and walked them through the structural design, something clicked. This was what he was good at. This was why he'd spent 4 years in engineering school and 3 years in construction sites. Not to be perfect, but to be competent. To understand how buildings stood up and what made them fall down, and how to design something that would last. The questions came hard and fast. How would the foundation handle soil settling? What about seismic activity? Had he considered alternative materials? Ethan answered each one without hesitation. He'd considered everything. He'd run every scenario. He knew this building better than he knew his own apartment. When the presentation ended, Jonathan Pierce stood and shook his hand. Excellent work, Ethan. The design is sound and the timeline is realistic. You have our approval to move forward. Croissant. That afternoon, Ethan called Victoria from his office. They approved the design. Of course they did. I knew they would. You have more faith in me than I have in myself. Someone has to. He could hear her smile through the phone. This calls for a celebration. I'm celebrating with Lily tonight. Ice cream and a movie. Tomorrow then, my place. I'll cook again. You don't have to cook. I want to. Besides, I like cooking for you. Ethan's chest tightened. Victoria. I'm falling for you, Ethan. Her voice was quiet, almost vulnerable. I know that's probably too fast and definitely too complicated, but I'm tired of pretending I'm not. He closed his eyes. I'm falling for you too. Good, because I'd hate to be doing this alone. Yes. The next evening, Ethan showed up at Victoria's apartment with flowers he'd bought from the grocery store. She opened the door wearing a dress that made his brain stop working, took the flowers with a smile that lit up her whole face, and kissed him before he'd even stepped inside. Hi, she said against his mouth. Hi yourself. They ate dinner on her couch with plates balanced on their laps, talking about everything except the project or work or anything that felt like obligation. Victoria told him about growing up in her father's shadow, always trying to prove she was good enough to carry the family name. Ethan told her about Rebecca, about the early years when they were young and stupid and thought love could solve everything. It must have been hard, Victoria said quietly, losing her. It was the worst thing that ever happened to me. For a long time, I didn't think I'd survive it. Ethan set down his plate. But Lily needed me to survive, so I did. You're a good father. I'm a father who's trying. That's not the same thing. It is to Lily. Victoria shifted closer. She adores you. I saw it the other night. The way she looks at you. That's love, Ethan. Pure and uncomplicated. Nothing about parenting feels uncomplicated. Yes, maybe not. But the love part is. Victoria took his hand. Can I tell you something? Anything. When I was reading to Lily the other night, I kept thinking about how I've spent my whole life building things, buildings, companies, a reputation, but I've never built anything that mattered the way she matters to you. Her voice caught. I want that. I want something that matters. Ethan pulled her closer and she came willingly, tucking herself against his side. They sat there in the quiet apartment while the city hummed outside, and Ethan felt the last of his careful walls crumble. You matter to me, he said. You and Lily, you're everything that matters. Victoria looked up at him, her eyes bright. Good, because you're everything to me too, was. They kissed, slow and deep, and when Victoria took his hand and led him toward her bedroom, Ethan followed without hesitation. This was terrifying and wonderful and completely inevitable, and for once in his life, Ethan wasn't going to overthink it. He was just going to feel. The next 3 months were the best of Ethan's life. Work was intense but rewarding. The convention center moved from design to groundbreaking, and Ethan spent his days on site watching his blueprints transform into steel and concrete. He and Victoria were careful at first, keeping their relationship private, but eventually word got out. The gossip at Pierce Whitman was mostly curious rather than malicious, though a few people questioned whether Ethan's relationship with Victoria created a conflict of interest. Margaret shut that down fast. Ethan got his job on merit, and Victoria Hale had nothing to do with this project. If anyone has a problem with them dating, they can bring it to me. Nobody brought it to her. In March, Ethan finally moved out of the cramped apartment. Victoria helped him find a place. A 2-bedroom in a decent neighborhood with a kitchen that didn't have water stains and a bathroom where everything actually worked. Lily got her own room for the first time in her life, and watching her face when she saw the space was worth every penny of the increased rent. It's all mine? She asked, standing in the doorway. All yours, baby. Can I paint it? Whatever color you want. Lily chose purple, a bright, obnoxious purple that made Ethan's eyes hurt, but she loved it. Victoria showed up one Saturday with painting supplies and spent the afternoon helping Lily transform the walls while Ethan assembled furniture. His mother stopped by that evening and found Victoria on the floor with Lily, both of them covered in purple paint, giggling about something Ethan had missed. Carol pulled him aside in the kitchen. She's good with her. I know. You love her. It wasn't a question. Ethan looked through the doorway at Victoria and Lily, at this strange, wonderful family they were building. Yeah, Mom, I do. Then don't screw it up. I'm trying not to. Try harder. But Carol was smiling when she said it. In April, the convention center project hit its first major snag. The soil tests came back showing unstable ground conditions on the north end of the property. Nothing catastrophic, but enough that Ethan's original foundation design wouldn't work. He spent a week redesigning the support structure, running new calculations, consulting with geotechnical engineers. It was Victoria who found him at midnight in his home office, hunched over his laptop with cold coffee and stress radiating off him in waves. "Come to bed," she said from the doorway. "I can't. This has to be ready for the morning meeting." "It's ready enough. You need sleep." "Victoria, oh, Ethan?" She crossed to his desk and closed his laptop. "I know you think you have to be perfect. That one mistake will prove you don't deserve to be here. But that's not true. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone has setbacks. This project is my responsibility. And you're handling it. But you can't handle anything if you work yourself into the ground." She pulled him to his feet. "Come on. Bed, now." Ethan let her lead him to the bedroom, too tired to argue. She curled against his side, her hand over his heart, and within minutes, he was asleep. The next morning, he presented the revised foundation design to the stakeholders. They approved it with minor modifications, and the project stayed on schedule. Margaret caught him afterward in the hallway. "Good save," she said. "The soil issue could have derailed us for months. It was close, but you handled it. That's what matters." She paused. "You know Jonathan's talking about making you a partner?" Ethan's stomach dropped. "What?" "Not immediately, but in the next few years, if you keep delivering like this." Margaret smiled. "You're doing good work, Ethan. Stop waiting for someone to tell you you don't belong here." That night, Ethan told Victoria about the partner conversation. She screamed and threw her arms around him, nearly knocking him over. "That's incredible. It's not definite, but it's possible. Ethan, do you realize what this means? 4 months ago, you were hauling concrete. Now they're talking about making you a partner. It feels too fast." "It feels exactly right." Victoria pulled back to look at him. "You earned this. Stop questioning whether you deserve good things." "I'm working on it. Work harder." He kissed her, and she kissed him back. And for a while they forgot about partnerships and projects and everything except each other. In May, Lily turned 7. Victoria threw her a birthday party at a place with rock climbing walls and laser tag, and Lily invited half her class. Ethan watched his daughter run around with her friends screaming with laughter and felt his chest tighten with gratitude. This was what he'd been fighting for. This moment. This joy. Victoria appeared beside him with 2 slices of birthday cake. "She's having the time of her life," Victoria observed. "Thanks to you. I just rented the place. You're the one who gave her a childhood worth celebrating." Victoria handed him a fork. "Eat your cake." They sat together watching Lily play. And Ethan realized something that should have terrified him but somehow didn't. He wanted this forever. Victoria and Lily and birthday parties and purple bedrooms and late nights working on projects together. He wanted the life they were building, messy and complicated and real. He wanted to marry her. The thought should have sent him into a panic. It had only been 7 months since that morning on the highway. 7 months since he'd been a broke construction worker with no future. Everything had changed so fast. But looking at Victoria, watching her laugh at something Lily's friend had said, Ethan knew it was right. He just had to figure out how to ask. 2 weeks later, the convention center reached a major milestone. The steel framework was complete, the skeleton of the building standing against the sky. The stakeholders organized a celebration on site, champagne and hard hats, photos for the press. Ethan stood with Margaret and the other engineers while photographers snapped pictures of the structure he'd designed. Victoria showed up near the end, talking to Jonathan Pierce about something, but her eyes kept finding Ethan across the crowd. When the official photos were done, she made her way over to him. "It's beautiful," she said, looking up at the steel beams. "It's not done yet. But it will be. And when it is, this whole city will know you built it." She squeezed his hand. "I'm proud of you." "I couldn't have done this without you." "Yes, you could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to." "Ok." That night, after Lily was asleep, Ethan sat on the couch with Victoria and pulled out a small box he'd been carrying in his pocket for 3 days. "I have something for you," he said. Victoria looked at the box, then at his face. "Ethan, oh, before you panic, it's not what you think. Not yet." He opened the box to reveal a simple silver bracelet. "I know we've only been together 7 months. I know that's too fast for the big question. But I wanted you to have something that says I'm serious about this. About us." Victoria's eyes were bright as she took the bracelet. It's beautiful. There's an inscription. She turned it over. On the inside, in small letters, the right choice. That morning on the highway, Ethan said quietly, stopping to help you was the right choice. Everything that's happened since then has proven it. You're the right choice, Victoria. Every single day. Victoria's hands were shaking as she put on the bracelet. Then she kissed him, deep and fierce, and full of everything words couldn't say. When they finally pulled apart, she was crying. I love you, she whispered. I'm completely in love with you. I love you too. Is that a promise? It's a fact. Ethan pulled her closer. And when the time is right, when we've both had enough time to be sure, I'm going to ask you the big question. Fair warning. Victoria laughed through her tears. Fair warning received. They sat together in the quiet apartment, Victoria's head on his shoulder, the bracelet catching the light every time she moved her hand. Outside, the city hummed with life. Inside, Ethan felt something he'd thought he'd lost forever. Peace. The summer passed in a blur of construction deadlines and weekend trips with Lily. Victoria took them to the beach, to museums, to a cabin in the mountains where Lily learned to fish and complained about bugs. They were building something together. Not just a relationship, but a family. Messy and imperfect, and more real than anything Ethan had experienced since Rebecca died. In August, his mother pulled him aside after a Sunday dinner. You're going to ask her to marry you, Carol said. Eventually. Don't wait too long. Life's short, Ethan. You know that better than anyone. I know. Then stop being cautious. You've earned the right to be happy. That week, Ethan went ring shopping. He found a simple diamond on a platinum band, elegant and understated, exactly like Victoria. He hid it in his sock drawer and tried to figure out the right moment to ask. But the right moment kept slipping away. Work got busy. Lily started second grade. The convention center project moved into the final phases, demanding more of Ethan's time and attention. In September, everything came to a head. The project timeline had been aggressive from the start, but the client started pushing for an early completion. They wanted the building ready for a major industry convention in November, 2 months ahead of schedule. The pressure came down from the stakeholders to Pierce Whitman to Ethan. It's not possible, he told Margaret. We're still finishing interior work. The electrical isn't complete. We need those 2 months. I know, but the client is threatening to pull funding if we can't deliver. Then let them pull it. I'm not signing off on a building that isn't ready. Margaret looked at him for a long moment. You're sure about this? Completely sure. I'm not putting my name on something that could fail. Even if it costs us the project. Even then. Margaret nodded slowly. I'll back you up. But this is going to get ugly. Boom! She was right. The stakeholder meeting the next day was brutal. The client's representatives argued that the delays were unacceptable. Jonathan Pierce and the other partners tried to mediate. Ethan stood his ground, walking them through exactly why rushing the timeline was dangerous. The building is structurally sound, he said, but the system's integration needs time to test properly. The HVAC, the electrical, the emergency systems, they all have to work together. If we rush that process, we risk catastrophic failure. We have a contract, the client's lawyer said coldly, with penalties for delays. Then enforce the penalties. But I'm not compromising safety for your convention. The room went silent. Ethan could feel every eye on him, could sense the partners calculating the cost of losing this contract. Then Victoria spoke. She'd been sitting quietly in the back of the room, observing as a courtesy since Hale Global had a small stake in the project. Now she stood, and every head turned. If you terminate this contract, Hale Global will sue for breach, she said calmly. We invested in this project based on the original timeline and Pierce Whitman's reputation for quality work. If you pull funding because they refuse to compromise safety standards, that's a breach of our agreement. The client's lawyer started to argue, but Victoria cut him off. More importantly, if you force this building to open early and something goes wrong, the liability will destroy your company. Is a convention really worth that risk? The silence that followed was absolute. Finally, the client's CEO sighed. We'll stick with the original timeline. The meeting ended, and Ethan found Victoria in the hallway afterward. The meeting ended, and you didn't have to do that, he said. Yes, I did. You were right, and they were being stupid. She straightened his tie, a gesture that had become habit. That's what partners do. They back each other up. Partners? Well, we're not engaged yet, but I'm hoping that's temporary. Ethan laughed despite the tension still humming through his body. Soon. I'll hold you to that. That night, Ethan went home and pulled the ring from his sock drawer. He looked at it for a long time, thinking about timing and perfect moments, and all the reasons he should wait. Then he thought about his mother's words. Life's short. You know that better than anyone. He knew exactly when he was going to ask. The convention center's official completion was scheduled for late November. The building stood finished and gleaming, every system tested and certified, every detail exactly as Ethan had designed it. The grand opening would be a major event. City officials, press coverage, hundreds of guests. The perfect moment to ask Victoria to marry him. Ethan spent the weeks leading up to the opening working with Margaret to finalize every last detail. He wanted this building to be perfect, not for his ego, but because it represented everything he'd fought to rebuild. His career, his confidence, his belief that he deserved good things. The night before the opening, he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Victoria slept beside him, and he thought about the last year, about how far he'd come from that desperate morning on the highway, about the life he'd built, the family he'd found, the love he'd been lucky enough to deserve. Tomorrow, he'd ask Victoria to make it permanent. Tomorrow, everything would change again. And this time, Ethan wasn't afraid of the change. He was ready for it. The morning of the grand opening, Ethan woke to find Lily standing beside his bed holding her best dress. Is today the big day? She asked. Ethan sat up, careful not to wake Victoria. Yeah, baby, today's the big day. Can I come? Of course you can come. Grandma's bringing you this afternoon. Lily climbed onto the bed and whispered, even though Victoria was already stirring. Are you nervous? A little. Don't be. You built something amazing. She said it with the absolute certainty only a 7-year-old could muster, and Ethan pulled her into a hug. When did you get so smart? I was always smart. You just didn't notice. Victoria laughed from her pillow. She's got you there. The next few hours passed in controlled chaos. Ethan put on his best suit, the one Victoria had insisted he buy for occasions exactly like this. She wore a dress the color of midnight, elegant and simple, her hair swept up to show the silver bracelet he'd given her. They looked like people who belonged at grand openings, who moved through the world with confidence and purpose. Ethan still couldn't quite believe he was one of those people. The convention center stood gleaming in the November sunlight, every window reflecting the sky, the main entrance framed by the glass atrium Ethan had fought to include in the design. Security barriers cordoned off the street while workers made final preparations, adjusting lights, testing microphones, laying red carpet that looked absurd in the industrial setting, but was apparently mandatory for these events. Margaret met them at the entrance, clipboard in hand, orchestrating the chaos with the precision of a general commanding troops. The mayor's running late, she said without preamble. Jonathan wants you to stall for 15 minutes before the official remarks. How do I stall? You're an engineer. Talk about load-bearing columns. People eat that up. She looked him over critically. You clean up well, Cole. High praise coming from you. Don't let it go to your head. We've got 300 people showing up in 2 hours, and the caterers just realized they're short 50 chairs. She was already walking away, talking into her headset. No, put the ice sculptures in the main hall. Yes, I know they'll melt. That's why they're sculptures. Victoria slipped her hand into Ethan's. You ready for this? Victoria slipped. I built a 200,000 square foot building. I can handle a speech. That's the spirit. Fake it till you make it. By 1 o'clock, guests were starting to arrive. City officials in expensive suits, business leaders Ethan recognized from the news, journalists with cameras and notebooks. He shook more hands than he could count, answered questions about structural design and sustainability features, tried not to look as overwhelmed as he felt. His mother arrived with Lily at 1:30. Carol was wearing a dress Ethan had never seen before, looking proud and emotional in equal measure. Lily ran straight to Ethan and grabbed his hand. Daddy, this place is huge. You think so? It's like a castle. Can we see inside? Victoria appeared at Ethan's elbow. I'll give her the grand tour. You need to meet with the mayor before the ceremony starts. he said. She took Lily's hand and they disappeared into the crowd. Ethan watched them go, his heart doing something complicated in his chest. 2 years ago, he'd been alone with his grief and his daughter and no path forward. Now he had this: a career, a future, a woman he loved who loved his daughter like her own. The mayor turned out to be a short woman with a firm handshake and an agenda. She wanted reassurance that the building was safe, that the timeline delays had been worth it, that there wouldn't be any embarrassing failures during her speech. Ethan gave her the reassurance, walked her through the safety certifications, and managed not to mention that her speech was the least important part of the entire day. At 2 o'clock, the ceremony began. Jonathan Pierce took the stage first, delivering remarks about Pierce Whitman's commitment to excellence and structural innovation. Then the mayor spoke about economic development and job creation, using the convention center as a symbol of the city's bright future. Ethan stood off to the side with the other engineers and tried not to think about the ring box in his jacket pocket. Finally, Jonathan called him to the stage. And now I'd like to introduce the man who made this building possible, our lead structural engineer, Ethan Cole. The applause was polite but genuine. Ethan walked to the microphone and looked out over the crowd, 300 faces staring back at him. He found Victoria and Lily standing near the front, both of them smiling, and something in his chest settled. 2 years ago, Ethan began, I was working construction, hauling concrete, running materials, doing the kind of work that tears up your back and your hands. I'd been out of engineering for 3 years and I'd convinced myself I was done, that I'd missed my chance. The crowd had gone quiet. This wasn't the speech they'd expected. Then one morning I was driving to an interview, the interview that was supposed to save my daughter's future. And I saw someone stranded on the highway. A woman in a business suit standing next to a broken-down car, completely alone. And I knew if I stopped, I'd be late. I knew I'd lose everything. He could see Victoria's face now, could see the moment she realized where this was going. But I stopped anyway, because my wife, before she died, taught me that the kind of person you are matters more than the success you achieve. That integrity isn't about making the smart choice. It's about making the human choice, even when it costs you. Ethan paused, letting the words settle. I was late to that interview. I lost the job. And for weeks I thought stopping had been the biggest mistake of my life. But the woman I helped, Victoria Hale, she found me on a construction site weeks later. She called the firm that had rejected me and told them what had happened. She gave me a second chance. Victoria was crying now, not bothering to hide it. Lily was holding her hand, watching her father with wide eyes. This building represents a lot of things. Economic growth, architectural achievement, structural engineering at its finest. But to me, it represents something else. It represents the moment I learned that kindness isn't weakness, that stopping to help someone, even when it costs you everything, is never the wrong choice. Because that one decision led to this job, to this career, to a future I thought I'd lost forever. Ethan looked directly at Victoria. It led to the best things in my life, and I wouldn't trade any of it for the world. The applause that followed was different now, warmer, more personal. Ethan stepped away from the microphone and walked off the stage, heading straight for Victoria. She met him halfway, tears streaming down her face. "That was beautiful," she whispered. "It was true." He took her hand, every word. The official ribbon cutting happened at 3 o'clock. Ethan stood with the mayor and Jonathan Pierce, holding oversized scissors that felt ridiculous in his hands, and cut through the ceremonial ribbon while cameras flashed. Then the doors opened and guests flooded inside to tour the building Ethan had designed. He watched them explore the exhibition halls, the conference rooms, the grand ballroom with its soaring ceiling and intricate lighting. Every detail was exactly as he'd envisioned it. Every calculation had held. Every risk he'd taken with the design had paid off. This was his. He'd built this. Margaret found him in the main hall an hour later. "The partners want to see you. Conference room B." Ethan's stomach dropped. Now? Now. He followed her through the crowd to a smaller room off the main corridor. Jonathan Pierce was waiting with the other senior partners, 5 people who controlled the future of Pierce Whitman and everyone who worked there. "Sit down, Ethan," Jonathan said. Ethan sat. His hands were sweating. "We've been discussing your performance over the past 18 months, Jonathan continued. "The Foster Bridge analysis, the convention center, your handling of the client dispute in September. You've exceeded every expectation we had." Thank you. Which is why we'd like to offer you a junior partnership, effective immediately. The words didn't make sense at first. Ethan stared at Jonathan, then at the other partners, trying to process what he'd just heard. Partnership, he repeated. Junior partnership, Margaret clarified. It's a 3-year track to full partnership, assuming you continue performing at this level. But yes, you'd be a partner. I've only been here 18 months. And you've delivered better work than people who've been here 10 years. Jonathan slid a folder across the table. This is the offer. Take some time to review it. Discuss it with your family. We'd like an answer by the end of the month. More stumped. Ethan opened the folder with shaking hands. The salary number made his vision blur. The benefits package included things he'd never even considered. This wasn't just a job. This was generational security. This was Lily's college fund and his retirement and a future that extended beyond survival. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. Jonathan stood and extended his hand. You've earned this, Ethan. Don't doubt that. Ethan shook his hand, then the hands of all the other partners. When he walked out of that conference room, his legs felt weak. He found Victoria near the atrium talking to a group of developers and pulled her aside. They offered me a partnership. Victoria's eyes went wide. What? Junior partnership, 3-year track to full. They gave me the offer letter. Ethan, that's incredible. She threw her arms around him, not caring that people were watching. I'm so proud of you. I can't believe this is real. It's real. You made it real. She pulled back to look at him. What did you say? That I'd think about it. But Victoria, the salary... He lowered his voice. It's more than I ever made before Rebecca died. It's enough to actually save for Lily's future. To stop worrying every month about whether we can afford groceries. Then you know your answer. I know my answer. He kissed her, quick and firm. But first, I have something else I need to do. Victoria looked confused. What? You'll see. Find Lily and meet me in the ballroom in 10 minutes. Ethan, what are you... 10 minutes. Trust me. He left her standing there and went to find Margaret. She was in the main hall directing the catering staff, her headset still in place, looking like she'd been running a marathon. I need a favor, Ethan said. You just got offered a partnership. I think you've earned a favor. EH. I need to use the ballroom, just for 10 minutes. Can you clear it? Margaret's eyes narrowed. Why? I'm going to propose to Victoria. A smile broke across her face, the first genuine smile Ethan had ever seen from her. Give me 5 minutes. By the time Ethan made it to the ballroom, Margaret had somehow managed to clear 300 people out of the massive space. The room stood empty except for the glittering chandeliers and the city visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was perfect. Victoria appeared in the doorway with Lily, both of them looking confused. Ethan, what's going on? He walked to the center of the ballroom and knelt down so he was eye level with Lily. Hey, sweetheart, can I ask you something important? Lily nodded, suddenly serious. How would you feel if Victoria became part of our family? Like officially part of it? Lily's eyes went huge. You mean married? Yeah, I mean married. Yes! Lily practically screamed it. Yes, yes, yes. Can she be my new mom? Ethan glanced at Victoria, who was standing frozen in the doorway with both hands over her mouth. If she says yes, then yeah. She can be your new mom. Lily threw her arms around his neck. Ask her, Daddy. Ask her right now. Ethan stood, pulled the ring box from his pocket, and walked toward Victoria. She was crying again, tears streaming down her face, her whole body shaking. Victoria Hale, Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion. A year and a half ago, you were stranded on a highway, and I made a choice that changed my entire life. Since then, you've given me everything. A second chance, a career, a future I didn't think I deserved. But more than that, you've given me something I thought I'd lost forever. You've given me hope. He dropped to one knee, and Victoria made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. I love you. Lily loves you. And I know this is fast. I know we've only been together a year, but I've learned that life's too short to wait for perfect timing. So I'm asking you now, in this building that we helped create together, in front of my daughter, who adores you, will you marry me? Victoria was nodding before he even finished the question. Yes, yes, absolutely yes, okay. Ethan stood and slid the ring onto her finger, and she kissed him so hard they both nearly fell over. Lily ran across the ballroom and crashed into both of them. And for a moment, the three of them just held on to each other in that empty ballroom while the city stretched out below. I love you, Victoria whispered against Ethan's shoulder. I love both of you so much. We love you too, Lily said. Can I be in the wedding? You can be in the wedding, Victoria promised. You can help plan the whole thing. Can we get a dog? Let's start with the wedding and work our way up to the dog. They stood there together, this strange and wonderful family, and Ethan felt something shift in his chest. For 3 years after Rebecca died, he'd been carrying grief like a weight, convinced he didn't deserve to move forward, convinced that finding happiness again would somehow betray her memory. But standing here with Victoria and Lily, Ethan understood something he hadn't before. Loving again wasn't betrayal. It was honoring Rebecca's memory by refusing to give up on life, by choosing to keep going, to keep fighting, to keep believing that good things were still possible. Rebecca would have liked Victoria, would have approved of the way she loved Lily, the way she pushed Ethan to be better, the way she'd refused to let him disappear into grief and poverty and defeat. She would have wanted this for them. The thought brought tears to Ethan's eyes, but they were good tears, clean tears, the kind that washed away old pain instead of adding to it. Margaret appeared in the ballroom doorway. I can only keep people out for so long. You three done in here? We're done, Ethan said. And Margaret, thank you. Don't thank me. Just name a conference room after me when you make full partner. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and champagne. Word about the engagement spread through the crowd faster than Ethan thought possible. His mother cried and hugged Victoria so hard she nearly cracked her ribs. Robert Hale, Victoria's uncle, shook Ethan's hand and told him he'd better take care of his niece or answer to him. Jonathan Pierce made a toast about love and engineering and building futures that last. It was overwhelming and perfect and exactly what Ethan needed. Late that night, after the crowd had dispersed and the caterers had cleaned up and the building stood quiet, Ethan walked through the empty convention center one last time. Victoria and Lily waited for him near the entrance, but he needed a moment alone with what he'd built. The main hall was dark except for the emergency lighting. Ethan's footsteps echoed on the polished floor. He looked up at the ceiling, at the support beams he'd designed, at the structure that would stand for decades because he'd refused to cut corners or compromise on safety. This building was his legacy, but not because of the engineering or the design or the acclaim. It was his legacy because it represented a choice he'd made on a cold October morning to be the kind of person who helped strangers, to value integrity over success, to believe that doing the right thing mattered, even when it cost everything. That choice had led him here, to this building, to this partnership, to Victoria and a future he couldn't have imagined 18 months ago. Ethan thought about all the people who'd faced their own versions of that moment, the choice between self-interest and compassion, between the smart move and the human move. He hoped they'd choose compassion, hoped they'd understand that success built on selfishness was hollow, but success built on kindness was something that lasted. Because in the end, the buildings you construct and the money you earn and the titles you achieve, none of it matters as much as the person you choose to be, the father you are to your daughter, the partner you are to someone you love, the human you are when nobody's watching. Ethan had learned that the hard way, had spent 3 years in poverty and grief before finally understanding that his worth wasn't measured by his salary or his job title. It was measured by whether he could look Lily in the eye and know he'd lived with integrity, whether he could look at himself in the mirror and recognize the man staring back. He recognized that man now. Finally, Victoria appeared beside him in the darkness, Lily asleep in her arms. You okay? She asked quietly. Yeah, I'm okay. Ethan took one last look at the building he'd designed, then turned toward his family. Let's go home. They walked out of the convention center together, and Ethan didn't look back. He didn't need to. The building would still be there tomorrow, standing as proof that he'd rebuilt his life from nothing, that he'd taken a moment of compassion on a highway and transformed it into something lasting. But right now he had more important things to focus on, like Lily's upcoming dance recital, like planning a wedding, like being present for the small, ordinary moments that actually mattered. 6 months later, Ethan and Victoria got married in a small ceremony with just family and close friends. Lily served as the flower girl and gave a speech about how she'd always wanted a mom who understood engineering. Carol cried through the entire ceremony. Robert Hale gave Victoria away and threatened Ethan one more time about taking care of his niece. They honeymooned in Thailand, the country Victoria had fallen in love with years before. Lily stayed with Carol and sent them approximately 40 text messages a day demanding updates and pictures. When they returned, Ethan moved into Victoria's apartment. The space was bigger than anywhere he could afford, and Lily finally got the bedroom she'd been dreaming about. They adopted a dog, a golden retriever puppy Lily named Engineer, which made Ethan laugh every time he said it. Work continued. The convention center became one of the most successful venues in the city, hosting conferences and exhibitions and events that drew visitors from around the world. Ethan's name became synonymous with quality structural engineering, and Pierce Whitman promoted him to full partner 2.5 years into his junior partnership track. But the professional success, while gratifying, wasn't what Ethan remembered when he looked back on that period of his life. What he remembered was teaching Lily to ride a bike in the park while Victoria cheered from the sidelines. What he remembered was Sunday morning breakfasts with his new family, pancakes and laughter and Engineer begging for scraps under the table. What he remembered was the ordinary, beautiful moments that made life worth living. 5 years after that morning on the highway, Ethan stood on a bridge during the opening ceremony and thought about how far he'd come. This bridge was his design too, a pedestrian crossing over the river, elegant and functional and built to last 100 years. The mayor was there, giving another speech about economic development. Victoria stood beside him, holding the hand of their 2-year-old son, Daniel. Lily, now 12, was taking photos on her phone to send to her friends. "This is cool, Dad," she said. "Not as cool as the convention center, but still pretty cool." High praise from the toughest critic I know. "Someone has to keep you humble." Ethan laughed and pulled her into a side hug. She was almost as tall as Victoria now, growing faster than he could process, but she still let him hug her in public. He'd take it while it lasted. After the ceremony, after the photos, and the congratulations, and the inevitable questions about his next project, Ethan walked onto the bridge alone. He stood in the middle, looking down at the river flowing beneath, and thought about the path that had brought him here. A broken-down car on a deserted highway. A choice to stop when every logical instinct said to keep driving. A failed interview and 3 weeks of thinking he'd destroyed his future. Then Victoria walking onto that construction site, refusing to let him disappear into obscurity. Every moment had mattered. Every choice had led to the next, building a life he couldn't have planned or predicted. A life that was messy and complicated and real. Ethan understood something now that he hadn't understood 5 years ago. Life wasn't about avoiding mistakes or making perfect choices. It was about showing up, being present, choosing kindness over convenience, even when it cost you. Building something that mattered, whether that was a bridge or a family or a legacy of integrity. The world would tell you to look out for yourself first, to make the smart choice, the safe choice, the choice that protected your interests above all else. But the world was wrong. The smart choice was often the selfish choice. The safe choice was often the coward's choice. The right choice was usually harder, usually cost more, usually demanded something from you that you didn't think you could give, but it was always worth it. Ethan looked out over the city he'd helped build, at the skyline dotted with his designs, at the life he'd constructed from rubble and grief and determination. None of it would have happened if he'd driven past Victoria that morning. None of it would exist if he'd chosen self-interest over compassion. Victoria appeared at the end of the bridge with Daniel on her hip and Lily trailing behind, texting on her phone. His family, his future, his proof that the right choice always mattered. "You coming?" Victoria called. "We're going to be late for dinner." "Coming!" Ethan took one last look at the bridge, at the structure that would carry people across the river long after he was gone, and smiled. He'd built something that would last, not just in steel and concrete, but in the way he'd lived his life, in the example he'd set for Lily and Daniel, in the kindness he'd shown when it was hardest to show it. That was worth more than any partnership or salary or professional acclaim. That was everything. Ethan walked off the bridge toward his family, and he didn't look back. The bridge would still be there tomorrow, standing strong, just like everything else he'd built. But right now, he had dinner reservations, and a wife who hated being late, and a daughter who would complain about the restaurant while secretly loving every minute. He had a life worth living, and it had all started with one choice on a cold October morning when he'd decided to be the kind of person who stopped to help someone in need. That choice had cost him everything in the moment, but it had given him everything that mattered in the end. Kindness wasn't weakness. Compassion wasn't foolishness. And the right choice, no matter how much it cost, was always worth making. Ethan had learned that lesson the hard way, but he'd learned it well, and he'd spend the rest of his life teaching it to his children, so they'd know that success without integrity was hollow, but a life lived with compassion was rich beyond measure. That was his legacy, not the bridges or the buildings or the professional achievements. The person he'd chosen to be, the father, the husband, the man who'd stopped on a highway because someone needed help. That man had built something that would last forever.